Dr. Jennifer Thomas, thank you so much for being here with us today on the RevRx Podcast. What a privilege it is to have you here on the show.
Hey, Chad. It's good to be with you. Thanks for having invited me.
Yes, ma'am. I'm a big fan of your work. You have co-authored several books with Dr. Gary Chapman, who is also one of my relationship heroes. You guys are instrumental in both my life and the lives of others that I impact through marital counseling and that kind of thing. So I'm really excited to have you here. But before we get into some of your works, I'd love for you just to introduce yourself to our audience, help us to get to know you a little bit better.
So, I'm a psychologist in North Carolina, and I used to do private practice. And then I've had a couple of book projects that have come along, and I ended up shifting into leadership consulting. So now I'm talking with people one on one as they're working as managers or C suite executives, and I'm trying to help them with their relationships in the workplace. But also, I share practical tools, as I'll do here today on the program, that people can use in all their relationships. They can take them home and use them that very night as well. My focus is on communication and preventing and resolving conflict.
Awesome. Big, important topics in our lives. And so jumping right into that, you are a thought leader and an expert in those areas. Is there some experience you had in your life that kind of drew you to that? I'm just kind of personally interested to see what drew you to conflict and conflict resolution and apologies. What was that aha moment for you that led you that way?
There were a couple of things. This one might date me. I enjoyed reading Dear Abby when I was
Yeah,
little.
yeah.
I also remember one time I was in a hobby shop with my parents, and there were some beautiful posters with nice sayings on them. And one was the Serenity Prayer, and it
Hmm.
really spoke to me. And I put it on my wall, and I thought about it as I aged. It's supposed to remain the same, but I was growing and changing, and felt called to become a counselor. And um, that was my prayer then with clients, was that I would have the serenity
Hmm.
to accept, what I could change and what I couldn't, and then to teach them the same. And when
Yeah.
I applied to undergraduate, it asked me on application, this was for the University of Virginia, which I ended up attending. They asked if you could teach any course, what would you teach and why? And I wrote that I would teach a course on communication because I understood, I think from my parents' own healthy marriage, that it was the quality of our relationships that drive a lot of our joy in life.
Hmm.
And I wanted to, for myself, to gain the skills that would help me to be able to navigate those relationships successfully. And I'm married. I've been married for about 30 years, and my husband and I have 3 kids. The youngest just started college, so we're new to this
Wow.
empty nesting thing.
Absolutely. Things are changing, aren't they?
Yeah, it's rather quiet around here, and the dog is bored. Like, where did all of my playmates go?
That's right. You're gonna have to you have to fill in the gaps. I love that. So a healthy relationship brings a lot of joy. All right. But there's this concept of conflict that tends to come into our relationships. I've heard it said conflict is inevitable. And perhaps that's true, but what is your perspective on conflict? Is conflict always a bad thing? Are there any situations in which conflict may be healthy or bring about good changes in our relationships?
I'm glad you asked that. I think conflict gets a bad reputation.
Hmm.
We often think of it as something to be avoided, but Gary Chapman and I see it differently. We know that offenses are inevitable. As we live and breathe and talk, we're going to inevitably step on some people's toes. And sometimes we need to have tough conversations with people that we
Yeah.
know are going to bring conflict. We may be disappointing someone by saying no to them when they want to hear yes.
Yeah.
But if we should be saying no to them, then that's acceptable conflict. It's not good to always be a yes person or to be a people pleaser. That's something that I see a lot of, and I work with managers and um, other people to help them be able to learn to say no. And I think
Hmm.
this really begins in our family of origin. So as I'm talking to parents or teenagers, I tell them, hey, don't be afraid of conflict. Just think about your principles. And if you're standing on your principles, you're on the right track.
Yeah. And I'll tell you that resonates very well with me. That's my story in a lot of different ways. That's a big part of my story because I've always grown up to be a people pleaser. I learned early on, if you make people happy, if you do what they want you to do, then you'll go far. I used that in school, made good grades, and always made sure I was in good graces with my teachers. Um, some people called me teacher's pet, that kind of thing. That was okay because you know what? That got me far in my academics. And I've always kind of thought, that wasn't manipulative or anything. It was just, hey, I want to please people. And that translated into later in my life and in my career where I had a hard time saying no. Um, I've since come to the conclusion the hard way, and we'll talk about that just a second, the hard way that no is an important word to learn. No is an important word for creating boundaries. And boundaries are important in our lives. And yeah, they may bring conflict because that may not be what the other person wants to hear. But if that's what you need to do to be your best self, then that's a healthy kind of conflict to create. But there was a period of my life where, and I may have shared this on the podcast before, but there was a period of my life where I was saying yes to everyone. I was a yes man.
It's a good way to run out of time because you can't
Yes,
please everybody and do their work and yours or whatever you're trying to say yes to.
absolutely. And I was early in my career and I was saying yes to everything at work. And I had just received a call to ministry and I was entering into the church world. I was an associate pastor at a small church. And as you may know, or some of our listeners may know, at a small church, you've got a few people that seem like they do everything. And so you could find me teaching Sunday school in the morning, leading worship for the morning service, preaching that night, leading a midweek service, and then all the prep time that goes along with that. And one day at work, I began to have heart palpitations. I began to be short of breath. I was having chest pain, thought there was something seriously wrong with me. That was my body's way of saying, you've got to create boundaries. Um, and ended up, long story short, got checked out. Everything was fine. Realized that this was my body crying out for help. And I cleared my schedule, created boundaries, and I've stuck with them ever since. And I've not experienced that before.
Yeah. And you're not the first person I've heard tell a story like that, a pastor who's frozen up in the pulpit. And it's a panic attack
Yeah.
coming on them. Yeah. It's a lot of pressure for sure. And I'm glad that that your heart was okay and that it prompted you to make changes. And that's something that we talk about with conflict, that it can do exactly that. It can get us unstuck from a rut that we're in, and it can be the turning point or the crisis that we need to actually make things better and move into a more positive direction.
Exactly. So a lot of work I do is in trying to show people how to prevent that sort of thing, not have to learn the hard way like I did. But you can use that no word. And I've heard it said this way: no is a complete sentence. A lot of times we feel like we've got to say no because or no, but you can just say no, and that's fine. And
Right. And I've got a quote along those lines. I learned that E.B. White, the author of Charlotte's Web, he didn't really like to be out much or be in crowds. And so when he was invited to the White House for an honor, he replied, no, I will not be able to attend for secret reasons.
I like that. For secret reasons. You can use that as an excuse. I will
Yes.
not be able to attend due to secret reasons.
Exactly. Another thing I've been working on is saying, along with no, sometimes I'll say, I don't do that. And it's more powerful than I can't do that, because then they could, try to free you up or make an excuse for you.
Right.
But if you say, no, it's not something that I do. Sometimes people go, wow, okay, maybe I should think about that too. Maybe I don't do that either.
Yeah, it's empowering.
Mm-hmm.
And it for a recovering people pleaser,
Right.
I find a lot of power in those boundaries, and that's why I'm really drawn to your work and this idea of conflict, because conflict can be healthy, and then relationships do bring joy. And so, digging in a little bit, so your latest book is a little bit younger audience, right? We're looking at teens, and so I just wanted to kind of ask you, pivoting to that younger audience, pivoting to the teens, what differences have you noticed in how teenagers experience conflict than maybe adults or young adults?
We've been through a lot of changes with our society, with their
Mm.
access to their phones all the time, really literally like connected to their hands.
Yeah.
They've got the pressure of social media.
Mhm.
They've got threats in there, pornography, other things that we may not have expected and don't want them to have access to. And so there are a lot of challenges that can come with that. I see teenagers who are depressed because of the power of friends and people posting, we're at this party and all those pictures are up there.
Yeah.
When you or I were teenagers, we might have had a sense that some things were happening that we weren't included in, but we didn't have to look at pictures or videos of
Mm.
it happening without us. And then those situations lead to their own kind of conflicts. So, someone might confront another friend, like, "Why wasn't I included?" For example, and they that could lead to an argument. And what we're doing in this book is we're talking about how do you keep it from becoming something that's escalating quickly? How do you keep it about the topic on hand and not throw in everything but the kitchen sink? And when needed, how do you apologize in a way that's going to speak to the other person?
Yeah. And in the book, you talk about anger too, right? And um, we think of anger. Anger has kind of a negative connotation. We think about anger. We think about anger problems. We think about anger management. But and I actually taught on this recently at church. Anger itself is not necessarily a bad thing. We know that Jesus experienced anger in the Bible, and so can you talk to us a little bit about that? That feeling of anger, and with these teenagers that may be facing the conflict that we just talked about, and there's just drama going on, right? I mean, that's just kind of the stage that they're in. How do they deal with that anger? And then what are some ways to think about that?
Glad you brought this up because one thing that we say is it's never wrong to be angry about what angers God. And
Mm.
so my co-author Gary Chapman and I have spent time writing about this and talking with teens. And what we say is it's important to recognize your anger. Don't just stuff it down because then we all know
Mm.
it's going to explode, probably
Right.
when you least expect it, and maybe on the wrong person.
Yep.
It's more likely that you're going to go off on someone in your family, someone who loves you and who you trust that they're not going to abandon you if you show your anger. And so we encourage people to turn to someone who they can trust if they've got a lot of anger and talk about the situation. We don't need to navigate all of this alone. So turning to a trusted pastor, coach, parents, other respected adults, and then also making sure that you have friends who have a good head on their shoulders.
Mm.
Just yesterday, I was visiting my college student, and he said that he had gotten a text from a friend from high school. The friend was about to break up with his girlfriend after a pretty long relationship, and so they were messaging back and forth about that. And then just a week later, this friend, they were texting on some other topic, but the friend said, "Hey, dude, do you think it's too soon for me to post a picture with this new friend that I have? She and I might start dating. We have a lot of shared connections. But we haven't been dating already." And my son said, "Absolutely not. It's it's way too soon."
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing you want. You want a sounding board and someone who's not always going to say yes, but who's going to say, I think that's going to shoot you in the foot.
Hmm.
That's the kind of person you want to keep around. And friends should be people who treat us well. If you have friends who treat you like an enemy, you may want to be looking around for some other friends.
Yeah.
So I encourage people to look into to say, do I have satisfying friendships right now? And if not, what do I need to do differently?
That hits me on a couple of levels. Maybe we can unpack that a little bit, but yeah, you're exactly right. Thank God for truthful friends. Um, we all need somebody who can speak truth into our life. Um, not just surround ourselves with yes men, right? Yes people. People are just going to agree with us no matter what. We need someone that's going to say, no, That's crazy. Don't do that.
Right.
That's not going to end well because let's face it, especially in those teenage years. And I look back to my teenage years and I'm thinking, man, what was I thinking? And the truth was I probably
Yeah.
wasn't, or at least not very completely. But yeah, I look back on some of the things and I'm like, I wish somebody had told me not to do that. Um, we need people like that in our lives. And if we look around and we realize, I remember being, and I wasn't quite a teenager, I was in elementary school, and I had a group of friends. I remember that we would sit, I'm in rural Georgia, big hunting area around here. And I hunt today. But back then when I was a kid, I didn't. I didn't hunt when I was like 8 years old. I had friends who did. And they would sit at the lunch table. And I remember this vividly. I'm 41 years old now, and I remember this vividly. 30 something years ago, we would sit at the lunch table and they would ask me, what kind of bullet does this gun shoot? And I would say, I don't know. I don't have a gun. I don't do that. And they would just all laugh at me. Those were my friends, right? They weren't life-giving friends. That was friendship at the expense of the person's emotions and feelings. And so I knew something in my little, 9, 10, 11-year-old heart that wasn't right. And I began to make my way and find some better friends. And I did. And I found some friends who accepted me. And I found some friends who gave me their time and their energy, and they wanted what's good for me. But sometimes we find ourselves in those places where the friends that we're around, they're not really and truly doing anything for us. And so I think that's wise. What would if we find ourselves in that situation, either as teenagers, young adults, wherever we find ourselves, what are some things we can do to kind of end those relationships or move towards some healthier relationships?
Yeah, so the first step in any problem is to recognize that you got a problem. That's
Mm,
what we've been talking about.
yeah,
Another sign that you've got a problem would be if people are laughing at you,
yeah,
not with you.
big difference.
Yeah, big difference. I used to date someone where I got that feeling that
Hmm.
there was a lot of laughter going on, but I was the butt of too many of the jokes.
Yeah,
And I decided that that wasn't going to wear very well in the long term. That was going to get old.
sure.
Um, and so I began to look around. So that's the first step. Figure out, okay, I've got a problem here. And then if you want to make changes, how do you do that?
Mm,
Some people can do it just within themselves. They can just set a new direction, a new intention, and they're off and running. Other people will need the encouragement of some of those trusted advisors or friends that we've
mm,
talked about.
yeah,
But someone to whom you can say, you know what, I don't think the situation that I'm in is the best. And often we may be blind to, or nearsighted about our own problems. But if you ask the people who are close to you, what do you think about my relationship? What
yeah,
do you think about this friendship? They may have a lot better clarity. So just being
mm,
open to their advice and asking them can be really an interesting way to get feedback. And then I would say, last, look at your schedule. See, are you full of activities? And if so, are they the kind of activities and groups that you want to be involved in? And if not, if you're spending a lot of time at home, you're on your devices, you're not interacting with real people, then I would hold yourself accountable to get out there more. Find a youth group, find an active group. Maybe it's some kind of sport that you enjoy, so that you're, for teenagers, you're building that resume or application for the future, but you're also stretching yourself socially.
yeah. You said something that's important, and I love the way you worded it. If you're not talking to a real person, that's a real common problem today, isn't it? That's an issue to where we're more connected than ever, but we're increasingly isolated and lonely. Uh, can you speak to that a little bit and the issue that our teens and young adults face today?
Yeah, so I'm both a clinical psychologist and a community psychologist. And the
Mm,
community part is more focused on culture and what we've been through as a society. And for us, we've all been through a pandemic.
mhm,
And for today's teenagers, that happened at some very formative time
sure.
socially. And so they may not be as comfortable talking to other people as we as adults are. They don't want to pick up the phone and call people. They don't want to knock on someone's front door. They'll text them and say, we're out here. You come on out. And I saw a meme today. It's geared towards adults, but I think it's true for everyone. It was 5 women on the sidewalk in New York, and it said, get off of your group chat and get with your real group.
Yeah.
And it's a good admonition, and I think also this streaming society we're in, we've got our smart TVs, we've got our Netflix. I worry some about, we're not going out and being with other people as much, unless it's like a watch party. But thinking about how much of the time am I just doing this? And maybe it's because it's easier, and maybe because there's not conflict there, which brings us back to this topic of the conflict's inevitable. If I mess up, how am I going to fix it? And what are the tools for doing that?
Yeah. One of the lines, I think it's on your website, I found this, and it said, one of the things you like to help people do is to know what to say in any situation. And I love that, because it's in those conflict moments where we're like, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to handle that. And you help us through that process. And so thank you for the work you're doing. It's much needed, and it's very important in our world today. And one of the areas I think that we need maybe the most help with is this area of apologies. You mentioned earlier about, apology is part of that reconciliation process. It's part of the conflict process or conflict resolution. You have co-authored a book with Dr. Gary Chapman on the apology languages. And I have found that resource incredibly helpful. I shared with you offline, but I was doing some marriage counseling with a couple, and the guy was just like, I said, I'm sorry. And I'm like, okay, well, that probably wasn't accepted very well. So I began to kind of do some research. There's got to be something out there about this and about how to apologize well. Lo and behold, Dr. Jennifer Thomas and Dr. Gary Chapman have this whole resource, and there's on the website, the Love Languages website, and then you have a book, that, of course, as the resource. But thinking about, okay, it's not just saying I'm sorry, but it's apologizing in a way that's going to actually reach that other person. Can we talk about that just a minute? Because I find that fascinating, because I've always thought apologizing was just, like I'll tell my kids are 4, 6, and 8. So it's all kinds of fun at my house. Yes. And so, but one of them will hit the other one or do something. I'm like, well, go, I know it was an accident, but go tell them you're sorry. And they'll go, oh, I'm sorry. They're not real thrilled about it, but they're going to say the words. And that's kind of, I'd like to teach them better, number one. And then 2, I know that there's all kinds of people out there that aren't real sure how to best apologize. Can you help us think about that, as we think about conflict, and then maybe specifically as far as teens?
So the project came out of my own marriage. I was like the guy in your office where I made a mistake one night and I said to JT, I'm sorry. And I thought we would move on, but he was left feeling like many of us do. And give me something more here. And I could tell he was really frustrated. And so I asked him what was wrong. And he said, well, I just wish you would apologize. And now we've got 2 people who are upset because I did. I said I was sorry, and he ignored me.
Yeah.
But I got curious, and I asked him what he wanted to hear. And at this point, I invite you and your listeners to think about, well, what would he have wanted to hear? Because chances are that your answer will reflect your apology language. And so I realized it's kind of like the love languages, where we have our script of what counts for us. But if we don't say it or do it the way they want, we're going to miss it with each other.
Yeah.
And in JT's case, he wanted to hear me say I was wrong. And so I said, okay, I was wrong. And in my head, I'm thinking that's kind of what I meant as a synonym for I'm sorry. But in his mind, it's very different, because I can be sorry without accepting any responsibility. And it does often go back to our family of origin. And the challenge is we grow up, we date, marry, work with people who had different parents. So in one family, like your family, saying I'm sorry might be perfectly acceptable. If your child grows up and gets married to someone whose parent would say, well, I'm sorry isn't enough, then that feels like a slap on the face, because here I said the magic words. I'm supposed to be out of the doghouse. But what we're sharing in our book, The Five Apology Languages, is that people have different magic words.
Yeah.
And we've done some research to look at what are the different things people want to hear. And no, we weren't looking for the number 5, but it was interesting to find that the answers of what people were looking for actually fell into 5 categories. And the first 2 are the biggest buckets. I've covered saying I'm sorry and saying I was wrong, but I'll run through the others.
Sure.
So for some people, they would listen to all of that and they would say, talk is cheap. I want you to do something to make it up to me. And so we call it our third apology language is making amends or making restitution. And then some people would be content at that point. But other people would be saying, well, I'm not sure that if you're going to stop doing this or if you're going to keep doing it again next time. And so for that person, part of your apology is letting them know if you put something in place in order to prevent it from happening again, if you created some guardrails or set some reminders so that the system is actually changing and improving. And then our final apology language is actually a question. And we found that only about 3% of people really want this, but for them it's very important, and that is the question, will you please forgive me? And with that, it's important to not be demanding, to not ask for it right on the spot. But I analyzed celebrity apologies and sports hero apologies. And I remember Lance Armstrong used this one pretty artfully in his apology when he acknowledged his doping. He said, I hope my fans can someday find it in their hearts to forgive me. And that's the kind of thing you can say without being controlling or demanding forgiveness right then. But to ask for forgiveness is kind of like bending on one knee. And it's scary for some people because you're putting the control of the relationship in their hands. But that's also what makes it so powerful. So those are 5 different ways that we can tell people, oh, my bad. I want to make things right with you. And I encourage everyone who's listening to go home today and talk to the people who are closest in your life. Of course, we have a paper and pencil test in the 5 Apology Languages book, but you can just ask them a couple of simple questions. I recommend asking, when you hear a really good apology, what makes it so good? And then the opposite, when you hear an apology that stinks, what's wrong with it?
Yeah. And that's so important because when we think about reconciling our relationships, it begins with that apology. And if that apology, if one person feels as though they've apologized appropriately, but the other person has a different apology language, then they feel like they've never been apologized to. And so you have this unspoken tension, this conflict that has arisen in the midst of conflict. And that's just a bad combination, it seems like.
That's right. And so as we talk to parents about how to teach their kids to apologize, we encourage them to teach all 5. And I thought about, well, what about the phrase, I apologize? Where does that fit in all of this? And where I've landed is that it's a good lead in to any apology. It gets their attention. It lets them know that you're not planning to spring the buts and the wells and the, if I offended you. It shows that you're about to accept responsibility. But in and of itself, it's not an apology. You'll need to use one or more of the apology languages with it.
Right. That's really good. I'm interested to see, when did you tie this together with Dr. Chapman's love languages? How did you make that connection?
I knew him a bit through networking. As soon as I moved to North Carolina, he was only 30 miles away, and I went and met with him, just really cold called him. And I found him to be very supportive and helpful, and he referred clients to me when I was in practice. And the agency where I worked was a nonprofit that was set up by 3 churches, and he was one of the key people in that, where his church helped. And one thing I liked was that the 3 churches were not all from the same denomination. So it was a multi-denominational effort among Christian churches.
Awesome.
Yeah, so when I had this situation with my husband and I realized that I was missing it with my apologies, we were volunteering at our church as marriage mentors, and we happened to be teaching that very weekend. So I thought it'd be good if we worked out that argument before we went to teach.
Sure.
And once we figured it out, I said, okay, note to self, this guy did not come with an instruction manual, but
Mm,
I want to remember what I just learned because it really made the tension go away. And so I was like, okay, his magic words are, I was wrong. So remember, I might tend to say I'm sorry because that's my natural reflex, but it's not his. And so I shared that with the couples who were all engaged. And I added, if you haven't had an argument yet, you'll certainly have one on your wedding day. And so you should go ahead and talk with each other. And we literally
Sure.
stopped the session for a few minutes so they could just turn to their partner and talk about what do you want to hear when somebody messes up.
Mm,
And then I added, I knew right away, this is a lot like the five love languages where you've got a script, you're doing your thing. You could be knocking yourself out trying to speak their language,
yeah.
but you may be missing it. And so I sat on the idea for about 6 months, and then I called and had another appointment with Gary Chapman. When I sat down, I shared this with him, just like you're listening to me, Chad. And he actually breathed a sigh of relief. And he said, oh, I'm relieved. And I said, what? I didn't expect that. I expected good or bad, but not
Uh,
relieved. And he said, yeah, when the front staff said that you wanted to come meet with me, that's what people do when they need marital help. And I
mm.
thought maybe, you and JT needed some help. And I said, no, not today, but, I'll keep your number handy.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's a really cool story. And so now when I counsel uh, when I counsel people who are married and they're wanting to reconcile, um, I have a session on the love languages because I think it's so important that we speak the same language, that we speak our spouse's language. But then I'll also have a whole session devoted to apology languages because to me those are two sides of the same coin. Um,
Right. And Gary Chapman, as our book was being released, he said, Jennifer, this isn't just one more book for me. He said, I see these two concepts as together being the two essentials for healthy relationships. And so
yeah,
wherever I travel and speak about love languages, I'm also speaking about apology languages now. And
very
my
nice.
hope is along those lines that when, people love to give the love languages book as a wedding gift, I want
Hmm.
them to be giving a 2-pack.
Yes,
Yeah, because we know they've got to be able to have their love tank full, but those offenses are going to crop up, and they need help for that as well.
absolutely. So important, and yeah, I agree with you. Those are a good combination, and conflict's coming. So you're right. If you haven't had it yet, it's coming your way. um, I wonder. This is just a thought that popped in my head. I wonder, have you made any correlation between someone's love language and apology language? Like, is there any sort of similarities between those? Like, does uh, I guess physical touch? Do they have their are they have I guess is there a more common apology language for those people, or is there not really a correlation?
Yeah, great question. I've talked some about this question in my newsletter. I do a free twice a month newsletter at drjenthomas.com. And where I'd still like to do a good study, and look at how the two fit together. It hasn't been done yet. So it's an outstanding
Okay.
question. But we know one place where the two concepts interact, and that is around giving giving gifts, or if you're doing something to try to make up for a mistake
Mm,
that you've made, if you're
yeah.
trying to make amends, then we recommend that you look at, well, what is their love language? Is it giving gifts, or
Mm,
no? Is it, for example, words of affirmation? If
yeah.
so, it might be more helpful to get them a card and write some of those words in there, or spend some quality time with them, maybe take them out for a meal, and then you could add words of affirmation by talking to them during that time about your commitment and why you value the relationship and why you're going to do your part to keep things on track.
Yeah, it's so good. I that popped in my mind. I'm thinking that there's probably some correlation there, but I like being able to use both of them. So hey, if they're more of the make amends, then how do you go about that? You need to speak their love language. So
Exactly.
makes all kind of sense. One other area I wanted to ask you about is in your book on conflict, you talk about the difference between kind of making things right and setting boundaries. In other words, the way that I kind of think about that is there's a time to step back and a time uh, to kind of engage, if that makes sense. Can you help us think through that and some maybe some practical areas where we might utilize one versus the other?
Yeah, so for the decision tree on should I step
Hmm.
back or should I stay in here and try to fix this? First question I would ask is, are you safe?
Hmm.
Is it a good situation for you to try to tweak things, see if you can make it better? Or is it going to be harmful to you, either emotionally or less likely physically? And so the answer to that is really going to determine what your next step should be. But if you're committed to staying and trying to work things out, I do like the idea of telling people that you're committed and why.
Hmm.
Um, on the other hand, since this is geared towards teenagers, I want to say don't commit too early. I actually had in my head that I was going to marry a different person than my husband. And luckily, we didn't get engaged. So it wasn't all a whole lot to go through. But I had to kind of untangle in my mind some of the path that I'd gone way out of limb that I shouldn't have.
Sure.
Um, and so, don't act like you're married or pretend in your head that you're married when you're not. And if you don't like the way someone's treating you, then I would say cut your losses. But how can we do that in a respectful way? Um, and here I think it's important not to ghost the other
Hmm.
person. I've been ghosted. I
Yep.
don't like it. It feels
Hmm.
bad, number one. And number two, it's a huge waste of time
Yeah.
because, if you've been through it, Chad, you don't know if they're getting your messages or not. And so you may end up spending time repeating, trying to reach out to them when they're never going to answer you. So,
Not to mention the overanalyzers like myself.
yes,
My
that's
brain's
right.
just yeah, I can't handle that.
Yeah, the mental trip is it's
Yeah.
real. I've been there too. I've been where I noticed the shower was a hard place for me, and
Yeah.
it's because you don't have the podcast going or people
Yep.
talking to you. You just got your own thoughts. And I like that quote, don't let people live rent free in your brain.
Hmm.
I've definitely been there
Yep.
and done that. So for your listeners, okay, I've got someone living rent free in my brain. How do I handle this conflict that's there? Um, Lots of different avenues, lots of different scenarios, but one is maybe if you're trying to defend yourself or do image management, it can be helpful for Christians to think about, well, I've been misjudged here, but I'm not the only one who's ever been misjudged.
Hmm. Yeah.
Like if Jesus is your role model, you can think about, well, he was misjudged
Yeah.
extremely. And so I also like the quote, what other people think about me is none of my business.
Mm.
That can help people get unlocked from having them living rent free in your brain.
Sure.
But at the same time, I might be speaking to someone who avoids conflict too much. And
Yeah.
so I would say to them, don't be afraid to talk about the hard things and to say, something hasn't felt right lately. I'm getting a vibe from you that I don't understand. And here I want to pause and say, be careful not to accuse them of anything or saying that they need to change because it's possible that I'm reading the situation wrong or that
Right.
I'm coming across the same way to them. And so I do encourage people, if they're going to confront someone, to actually start with some questions like,
Mm.
is it just me or is there tension between us? And then if they agree there is, then maybe asking, well, I'm not I'm not positive that I know what the cause is. This is what I've observed on my end. Do you agree with that? So see if they agree about what the problem is before you jump to, well, here's the solution. You need to do this or that or stop doing this or that. Um, because then you can get into an argument when they don't even agree about the facts with you.
Right.
So pause over here and say, this is what I'm seeing. Am I right? Am I remembering that the same way that you remember it? Then you've got a much better foundation for working through the conflict productively.
That's so important. And as I've gotten older, I feel like I've gotten better at that. But I think back to my teenage years, and I wasn't. I'm call it wise, I guess. I wasn't nearly as wise, um, because I would just kind of say, why are you being like this? Well, from their perspective, I'm not being any way. What are you talking about? And so being able to, communicate that maybe there's an issue. But I like how you said it. Do it in a respectful way. Um, what I said before is kind of hostile. It's going to make someone defensive, and it's going to create more conflict within that area. So yeah, be wise in the words that you speak. Don't be accusatory, and be kind about it, because I think communication in a kind and loving way will take out a lot of the conflict ahead of time, so that you can work through the actual conflict.
Right. And practical tips. This is very granular, but if you're using the word you in a way that you could point your finger at someone, you're probably making them feel defensive. And so the I messages may go over better, like, I'm sensing this tension. I've reached out, but I haven't heard from you. And I'm just wondering if you're doing okay. And that can be a helpful phrase sometimes. I recently was in a meeting with some people, like 8 people, and one of them was rude to the other. And I didn't know what to do. But I thought, well, next time that happens, I think I would say to the rude person, are you feeling okay? Because that sounded really harsh, and you're not usually that way.
Yeah. And a lot of times it seems like that has nothing to do with us. When someone acts that way towards us, a lot of times it has nothing to do with us. It's maybe something that's going on at home. And so empathy, I think, asking those empathetic questions and asking, are you feeling okay? Or, hey, I feel this way. Is that accurate? I think that really goes a long ways.
And empathy is so important, being able to put yourself in the other person's shoes. That's really at the foundation of speaking their love language and speaking their apology language, is getting out of your own mindset and realizing when it comes to showing love or making things right with people, one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah. Life's not just about you. And I feel like that if we could get outside of that, our relationships would thrive and flourish a lot more. And your work is helping us do that. The love languages and the apology languages really help us get outside of ourselves and realize that a relationship takes two, and we have to take to heart the other person. And Dr. Thomas, you're doing tremendous work. I appreciate your voice. It's very, very important in our world today. And so for my listeners that want to find out more about you, can you give them, I know you gave us your website a minute ago, but can you give them a couple of places that they can go to? And then I'll include links in the show notes as well.
The website is drjenthomas.com, and everything is there. My newsletter sign up, links to our books, which are the 5 apology languages, helping teenagers navigate their conflict. We also have a workplace book called Making Things Right at Work. And I have links to there's a free version of the apology language profile that people can find right on there. And then I'm on social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, LinkedIn. If people want to shoot me a question there, I'm happy to respond.
Awesome. Thank you again. It's been a pleasure having you here and having this conversation. And my hope and my prayer is that someone out there will take to heart your message and the encouragement that you've given us today, and it will impact them in a way that changes their relationships and changes their lives. So, Dr. Thomas, thank you so much for being a guest here today, and I wish you nothing but the best.